And he cried and he cried and he cried. At the end of the meeting, some of my well-meaning charismatic friends came to me and said, "Did you get the demon?" Well, I guess something like that. Mum came to me at the end of the week and said, "He's like he used to be again. What have you done?" And I explained to Mum what had taken place. It's domination story. It's wrong. But let's do another one. What if you're not the dominator? What if you want to overthrow the dominator? You begin to outwork your own story. This is called a revenge or revolution story. That says, if I can just get these people off my back, if I can just stop them from being over me, if I can just stop them from controlling me, then everything would be good. I would have peace and security. The problem with the revenge story, the problem with the revolution story, is some of us have spent our whole lives trying to overthrow some words that were spoken over us as a child. Some of us heard a teacher say to us, "You'll never be any good," and we've spent our whole lives trying to prove that we will be. And that teacher's long ago dead, but they still hold that control over us, and we still fight against it. Some of us fighting against a parent who spoke negatively into our lives all those years ago. I will overthrow that. I will break free of that. But our whole lives become colored by a desire to escape, to break free from this oppressor. But they're not there any longer. Everything we do is colored by a desire to please somebody who's no longer there. That's a revenge story, a revolution story. And the next one's the most dangerous story of them all. What happens if you fight your way to the top? What happens if you actually overthrow the oppressor? What happens if you're now in control? And you said, if we are in control, everybody will have peace and security. But now you are in control and everybody doesn't have peace and security. What do? Do you lift up your hand and say, I got it wrong. I'm really sorry. I made a mistake. Of course not. You begin to tell another story, the most dangerous of all the stories. You tell a purification story. You tell people everything would be okay if it wasn't for that group of people. Everything would be okay, we would have peace and security if it wasn't for them. So the Nazi Party get into power in the middle of Germany and everything's not good. They promised everything would be, but everything isn't. And so they begin to say to people, everything would be okay, we would have peace and security if it wasn't for the Jewish people. If it wasn't for... It's like the Holy Spirit has come in the ceiling. If it wasn't for the gypsies, everything would be okay if it wasn't for gay people. And what happens is they begin, the heart of the purification story is about ethnic cleansing. And they try to wipe out all these people who've tried to influence what they were doing. And that's a purification story. But churches fall into the trap of a purification story too. Churches say everything would be better in my church if everybody thought like me. Everything would be better in my church if that group of people over there who don't think like me would just leave. Everything would be okay in my church if everyone was, well, that's exactly it. If everyone was just like me, thought like me, walked like me, talked like me. And that's a purification story. And it happens so quickly and so easily to churches. Let's do another one. A victimization story. What if you're never going to be powerful enough to overthrow those who are in control of you? What do? You begin to outwork your own story, and this is called a victimization story. Now, there's always truth at the heart of each of these stories, of course. But the difficulty is very soon you can only see yourself inside the victim frame. You begin to recognize yourself only as the victim. Now, it might be true that you're a victim because of that oppressor. But very soon you can't be anything else. I was abused as a child. I am a victim. And for the rest of your lives, you walk as if you are a victim. You live inside a box which says victim. You never are able to escape this thing which says, I am victim. I grew up, you might be able to tell, but by the grace of God, I am not English, I am Welsh. That was the right response. And I grew up in a Welsh mining valley. But half a mile from my back door, there was a coal mine. And the Welsh miners were the working class heroes. They were the ultimate victim. And they would tell me about the time when they were oppressed by the powerful landowners. And then they would tell me about the time that they were oppressed by the mine owners. And when I was growing up, they were being oppressed by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government. And they took great pride in the fact that they were the victims. She wants to close all the coal mines down. Oh, how terrible, how we are victims. We live in this box. And then she closed all the coal mines. The coal mines were all closed. And this group of people who saw themselves as victims not only lost their jobs, but they lost their identities. Suddenly they had nobody who was oppressing them anymore, but they couldn't escape their victim box. And they lived trapped in it, and lots of them died that way, living out their lives as victims who never recovered from that situation, except for one group of coal miners who came up from under the ground, who looked around, who saw that the yard was already full of coal that had already been brought up. They decided what they would do is they would take all the money that was given to them because they were losing their jobs, and they would pool it together, and they would go to the government and say, can we buy off you this coal mine? Well, it had never been done before, but they were trying to encourage an entrepreneurial spirit. And so the government of the day said, well, yes, I suppose you can. These are smart men. They'd already recognized that there was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of coal already out of the ground. So they bought themselves a coal mine, and they worked their own coal mine for the next couple of decades. In the last couple of years, the last one of them has retired. They all retired as millionaires. Why? Because they refused to live inside the victim box. They refused to spend all their time there. They knew that they could be something else. Now, what if you don't want anything to do with those old, nasty, ugly stories? What if you want to escape all that? And, well, you begin to work out your own story. You begin to work out an isolation story. And the isolation story simply says everything would be okay if I could just get away from all that. And so we try and run away from the situation. We try and escape the situation. We try and set up our own little commune. I know, let's all escape together. Let's all go, well, somewhere warm where it rains just a little less. I know, let's go to Jamaica. We'll all escape together. Some of you said, yes, okay. So we all want to escape together to Jamaica. Then we discover that, actually, we don't have enough money to get to Jamaica. I know. Let's establish Jamaica here. And what we do is we set up our own little isolationist bubble, and we begin to outwork Jamaica here. So we dress as if we're in Jamaica, which would make a bit of sense in Brisbane. Doesn't make that much sense in England. You dress as if you're in Jamaica. You only listen to music written by Bob Marley. You begin to walk and talk as if you are in Jamaica, and you outwork this little isolationist bubble of yours. It sounds ridiculous, but this is the one that Christians outwork all the time. If I could just trap myself inside my building, if I could just stay safe and secure inside the walls of my church, I'll only listen to music that other people like me write. I'll only read books that people like me write. I'll only mix with people who are just like me. And we lock ourselves up in a Christian isolation bubble, holding out, waiting patiently, because one day Jesus is going to come back and he's going to take us away, and everybody else will be left behind. That'd be a good title for a book, wouldn't it? That's the isolation story. And lots of us live that way, and that is not a Jesus model of ministry. That locking ourselves away because let's keep ourselves safe. And listen, it is the devil out there who needs to be concerned for his safety, not the Christians in here. See, we've got that all the wrong way around. So we are influencing that way, changing our world, local churches that change the world. One last one. What if you can't escape, you don't want to do that either? You figure that actually for my peace and security, what I need is more stuff. And we begin to outwork for ourselves an accumulation story. And we say, if I had some more houses, if I had some more cars, if I had some more money, we never quite know how much is enough, but if I had more, then everything would be okay. If I just gathered as many material possessions as possible, then everything would be fine. Everything would be good. I would have peace and security. And we try and gather stuff. Now there's 6 stories. But it isn't as simple as just 6 stories which have their own distinctive borders. Because of course the stories can morph one into the other. So it's 1600s, it's the middle of England, there's a group of people being persecuted. They decide that they're going to escape. They go to the coast, they get on board a ship called the Mayflower, and they set sail for North America. This is a group of people who are victims. So they decide to outwork for themselves an isolationist story. They're trying to escape. They arrive, these pilgrim fathers, as they'll soon be called, on the shores of North America. The first thing they do is they encounter an indigenous population of Native Americans. The very first thing they do, escaping from being victims, outworking an isolationist story, is they begin to dominate the indigenous population that they've come in contact with. They push these Native Americans into their place, forcing the Native Americans themselves into a revenge or revolution story as they begin to fight back. That in turn pushes these, Christian people into a purification story as they try and wipe out this indigenous population off the face of their own country. This eventually will push these Native Americans into a victimization story from which they never have recovered. Now, I use that story, which is far, far away, because your one is a bit closer to home and a little bit more painful. But that's how these stories begin to morph one into another. These stories, of course, are all present in Jesus' time. So that domination story is being outworked by Pilate and by Herod. That revolution story is being outworked by the zealots, of which Simon, who becomes a disciple of Jesus, is one. That purification story is being outworked by the Pharisees, who say, actually, you've been caught in the act of adultery, you must die. And they try and push people away because of their sin. It's a purification story, but how quickly we buy into that one. We push people away because of their sin, when Jesus actually created the church to embrace people who sin. Sinners saved by grace. Victimization story, curiously, is primarily found in working class Galilee, where Jesus himself is going to come from, to prove that you don't have to remain a victim. You can rise above it. The isolationist story, not much about it in Scripture, but the Essenes are outworking that particular isolationist story. They set up their own commune, the most famous of which is in a place called Qumran, where we find the Dead Sea Scrolls. The tax collectors, the freelance Roman soldiers, are outworking for themselves an accumulation story. So these stories are found there, they're found throughout history, and if you want to try and find them today, if you switch on your television and listen to the news and listen to your politicians speaking, they're all telling these stories. These are the stories that you tell to win elections. These are the stories that you tell to polarize positions and get people in your corner. You'll recognize these stories easily because they're all defined by this characteristic. It is about